Ever heard of the race to Messina? It was one of the most dramatic showdowns of World War II, a high-stakes contest not just against the enemy, but between two of the most famous generals in history, America's fiery George S. Patton and Britain's meticulous Bernard Montgomery. Their rivalry defined the Sicily campaign, and it all came to a head in the ancient city of Messina. But what happened right after Patton claimed his victory? What did the great Winston Churchill, watching from London, have to say about it all? The answer is more complex and fascinating than you might think. The story begins in July 1943. Allied forces have landed in Sicily. The plan was straightforward. Montgomery's British Eighth Army would push up the east coast to Messina, the key port for Axis evacuation, while Patton's American Seventh Army protected their flank. Simple, right? Well, not for George Patton. He wasn't the type of general to play a supporting role. He saw this as a chance for American forces to prove their mettle and for him to prove he was the best commander in the field. Montgomery's advance quickly stalled against stiff German resistance near Mount Etna. This was the opening Patton was waiting for. He saw a path to glory. Instead of just guarding the flank, he proposed a daring end run, a wide, sweeping maneuver to the west, capturing Palermo, and then driving east to beat Monty to Messina. His superior, General Harold Alexander, the overall ground commander, reluctantly gave him the green light, though perhaps not for the full-scale race Patton envisioned. What followed was a lightning-fast campaign. Patton's troops advanced with incredible speed, living up to his blood and guts reputation. They covered vast distances, sometimes over 50 miles a day, through tough terrain and against pockets of enemy resistance. Patton was everywhere, leading from the front, pushing his men relentlessly. His famous pearl-handled revolvers became a symbol of this aggressive, unstoppable drive. He captured Palermo in a stunning victory, a huge morale boost for the American forces. But for Patton, Palermo wasn't the real prize, Messina was. The race was on. It became an obsession for Patton. He wanted to get to Messina first, to prove that his aggressive tactics were superior to Montgomery's more cautious, methodical approach. It was a matter of national pride and personal ego. The press back home loved the drama, framing it as a classic tortoise versus hare contest between the flamboyant American and the reserved Brit. This intense pressure had a dark side. It was during this drive that the infamous slapping incidents occurred. Patton, visiting a field hospital, encountered two soldiers suffering from what we now call PTSD, or shell shock. Believing they were cowards, he berated and slapped them. This act would later threaten to end his career, but at that moment, his focus was solely on the finish line. On August 17, 1943, it happened. A reconnaissance patrol from Patton's 3rd Infantry Division rolled into Messina, just hours before the British arrived. Patton had won. He staged a grand entrance, soaking in the glory. He had beaten Montgomery. He had proven his point. The American army had covered itself in glory. But the victory was bittersweet. While the generals were racing, a significant portion of the German and Italian forces, over 100,000 troops and their heavy equipment, had successfully evacuated across the Strait of Messina to mainland Italy. They had slipped through the Allied grasp, escaping to fight another day. So, what did Winston Churchill think of all this? Back in London, Churchill was, of course, a master of strategy and politics. He had a much broader view than the generals on the ground. He had to manage the delicate Anglo-American alliance, keep morale high at home, and planned the next phase of the war. Initially, Churchill's public reaction was one of triumph. The Sicily campaign was a success. The Allies had conquered the island in just 38 days, toppled Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy, and opened the Mediterranean for Allied shipping. In his speeches to Parliament and in his public statements, Churchill praised the brilliant campaign and the splendid cooperation between the British and American forces. He highlighted the strategic victory, not the internal rivalries. He couldn't afford to let a squabble between generals tarnish a major Allied achievement. But behind closed doors, in his private correspondence and memoirs, a more nuanced picture emerges. Churchill was a huge admirer of Patton's fighting spirit. He loved Patton's aggression and his get-it-done attitude. He once famously said of Patton, "He is the American general I would most want to have fighting for me." Churchill understood that war required generals with that kind of fire. He saw the value in Patton's audacity. However, Churchill was also a pragmatist and a statesman. He was deeply concerned about the Anglo-American relationship. He knew that open conflict between the top generals could poison the alliance. The race to Messina was seen by many in the British camp as a selfish stunt by Patton that prioritized personal glory over the strategic objective of trapping the enemy. They felt Patton's westward dash had stretched Allied lines and perhaps even made the Axis evacuation easier. Churchill had to walk a tightrope. He had to placate the British military establishment, including his top general, Alan Brooke, who was no fan of Patton. At the same time, he had to maintain a strong working relationship with the Americans, particularly President Roosevelt and General Eisenhower. In his writings, Churchill carefully acknowledged the American contribution and Patton's dashing advance, but he often framed the overall campaign as a product of British strategic planning guided by General Alexander. He never publicly condemned Patton for the race. That would have been disastrous for Allied morale and inter-Allied relations. Instead, he chose his words carefully. In his History of the War, the Second World War, Churchill described Patton's S-drive on Palermo as a spectacular move that electrified the American army. But when it came to the final drive on Messina, he was more measured. He presented it as two prongs of a coordinated attack rather than a competitive race. He focused on the end result, the conquest of Sicily. Essentially, Churchill's public pronouncements were about unity and victory. His private thoughts revealed an appreciation for Patton's aggressive spirit, tempered by a deep concern for the strategic and political consequences of such unbridled rivalry. He saw both the brilliance and the danger in a general like Patton. He understood that while Patton had won his personal race, the failure to trap the German army was a significant strategic lapse. So, what did Churchill say? Publicly, he said, "Bravo, a great victory for the Allies." Privately, he likely thought, "What a magnificent, reckless, and troublesome general. We won the battle, but we may have made the next one harder." He recognized the dual nature of the event, a tactical and morale-boosting triumph for the Americans, but also a missed strategic opportunity for the Allies as a whole. The race to Messina was a perfect example of the clash of personalities and priorities that defined the war, and Churchill, the grand strategist, saw it all. Thanks for watching. If you found this slice of history interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories behind the headlines of World War II. See you next time.